Hello and welcome to We Turned Out Okay. I am here with Andrew Moss. He is, as it turns out, which is so exciting to say, he's my coach. And the value of having your own coach, I'm learning again and again from this gentleman. And I'm very glad, Andrew, to bring you onto the show. Welcome, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Kay. Pleasure to be here.
Yes. And it's so fun. I don't usually jump in this way, but just before we hit record, we're having a really, really interesting conversation about how I use speech recognition software, what that sort of looks like for me. And you were just saying, I would actually love for you to repeat what you were just saying about how that struck you.
Sure. And I'll give you some context of where my question came. I was listening to a podcast on the weekend, Simon Sinek and a fellow by the name of Matthew Barzun. I think I pronounced that right. And they were talking about how the challenges that we have as children and as young adults, the skills that we develop to overcome those challenges younger in our earlier parts of our life often become the gifts and the skills that are we're most recognized for later in our life. And so I'm always curious when I meet people how what their challenges have been at different stages of their life, because oftentimes there are gifts hidden behind that they're not fully utilizing in their adult life, and maybe because they take them for granted, or maybe they haven't recognized that could be something that they put out to the world. And so what you were sharing about how you do your writing, so your electronic writing on your computer, and I think being able to use voice activated speech recognition requires someone to develop very accurate verbal techniques that nothing as human beings is isolated in one context. So being able to be articulate and accurate in your speech, I'm sure, is a gift that you have across many different areas. It just so happens that it's something that you have to use to create documents from verbal reciting. So I found that interesting, and I think as a coach, that's always something I'm digging around for, is where are those hidden gifts that maybe are just sort of, most people are oblivious to them.
Yeah. And it really brought me back. And I think this is why I wanted to record. So many listeners are parents and especially parents of young children. And so in my early childhood, singing and music were a big deal. In fact, my mom was an outstanding, she's not an outstanding singer anymore, largely because she lives in the Colorado Rockies, and altitude can mess with and she's made the choice to not sing in public because she wants to live in the Rockies. Anyway, she actually sang a solo in Vatican City for Pope John Paul II when I was in college. And I mean, she's at that level, right? She's an incredible singer. And I have these, and my dad's a great guitar player. So I have these wonderful memories of lots and lots of music in our home. My mom tells a story about my youngest brother, when he was born, was nursing. My mom was nursing him, and my dad pulls out the guitar, and my mom stands behind him to sing, which is how it always kind of went. And he stopped nursing because he turned his head to the guitar because he recognized that sound. And so when I grew up and was learning to be a teacher, I not only did I join a choir in college, but I took a couple of classes with an incredible professor in the music department at the University of Connecticut. And they were about music. They were music for the classroom teacher. And then so I'm learning how to bring music now. Even if I can't play the guitar, I can do a couple chords. I can bring children in with music, right? And then when I had my own kids, I mean, I've talked about this on this show before. We had entire conversations in song, like just mundane. Did you did you clean the dishes yet? Did you brush your hair? Yes, I did, Mom. Like those kinds of things. And it was always, singing and music were always the word I've got in my head is improv. Like,
Mm.
you know, someone like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who, if you've ever heard him do like a
Mhm.
rap battle or something like that, like these are that kind of preciseness in Lin's family was, you know, through rap battling or that kind of like rapping. For us, it was always very like, you can take anything and put it into any song. And it's funny and it's useful and it's feeling inducing and it's playful.
Mm.
And so just to connect that up with like when 7, 8 years ago, when I was like, well, I have no choice right now. I can't use my hands, but I don't want to be isolated. I want to use the computer to write.
Mm.
Um, uh, there really, there really is this sense of like, it's connected somehow to all of the verbal skills and all of the like it is not, it wasn't fun, certainly at first. There's a lot of things to be learned. Um, but coming through it, I can look back and I can see that it's a very gentle teacher because there is no, you know, there's no judgment. The computer either does what you need it to do or it doesn't. And once I learned, like, you can look up in Google or in YouTube, like how to do something. So
Mm.
I can remember, and this made me cry. I can remember looking up how to make a comment in Facebook or something using the speech recognition software, because there's a lot of layers, which I won't get into, a lot of technical issues interfacing between the software that I use on my computer and like something like Facebook, which is like a big,
Mhm.
crazy. Anyway, the video showing me how to do that was done by a person with limited verbal skills, like maybe something like cerebral palsy or something like that. So very limited arm and hand and body usage, but somewhat limited in their verbalness. And here they are teaching me how to do this this thing in the world. And I mean, it just brought tears to my eyes. I remember thinking like, what an incredible lesson. Here's learned from someone who is vividly living despite whatever challenges they have. And for me, that's really how this has gone. So
Mm.
um,
That's beautiful. Yeah, I spent about 6 months in a small coaching group program last year with a coach who was completely blind, and it was fascinating to hear him talk about how he read a client when he was coaching them, because it was all based on the energy of their voice and the changes in tone and timing and speed. And you know, he was so much better at tuning into those things than those of us that were relying on our visual, you know,
yes,
interpretation of what was going on. And it just reminded me once again that, you know, our brains, you know, we use so little of it because we're forced to use so little of it to do our sort of day-to-day mundane work. But then we're thrown a curveball like you were, and you develop a whole new area of skill and that your brain has to learn. And that's not a skill or a way of operating that the rest of us, you know, have the ability to do. So I'll be curious now that I know this a little bit more about this, you know, to explore that more with you over the next months, because I'm sure there's something in there that actually makes you unique in many other areas of your life as well.
oh wow, I hadn't thought of that.
Mhm.
I do look forward to that. One of the things I really enjoy about coaching with you, about being your client, is I I come out of a meeting with a sense of like possibilities that I didn't have before. So to me, this feels like here's another avenue where I don't know what the heck's going to happen, but it's going to be pretty cool.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like
Uh,
the best coaches do that. And I'm learning to do it. Like I can see it as something, as a skill that I really want to bring into my coaching. And
mm.
that feels to me very, very fun and playful.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this before we started recording as well, and you know, I think it's the same for coaches as it is for parents. It's like our job is to help get somewhere to a place where they can see a different future for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I think of my, I have 4 daughters, so my job is to get them to a place, when they're looking at college or when they're going through college, to see themselves and see the possibilities for themselves on their own, and to have the confidence to go out there and try things.
Hmm.
Like if I can do that, then to me, that's the job of a parent. And it's also the job of a coach, is to help their client get to a place to see a different sort of future, or a different set of possibilities for the future,
Yeah.
and then to trust themselves to go and give one of them a
Hmm.
try.
Yeah. And I love this. Something I've really been thinking on in the last couple of months is the kind of juxtaposition between freedom, which is a tremendous value of mine, creativity, which is another one, um, and responsibility and control, like how these things all kind of play in together. Because anyone with kids, I would say of any age, but the older you get, the more you see this. If you say to a teenager, "Hey, I think you should go do this," it doesn't really work. And if we think about it, when somebody like a boss or our parent says to us, "Hey, I think you should go do this," we don't like that either, right?
Mhm.
And so it's not my response. This is what I keep having to remember with my kids. It's not my responsibility to tell you what to do. It's my responsibility to help you see the range of possibilities, you know. And there is I have to remember that objectivity is really, really important. It's much easier to do that with a client because I'm not in their life. And so there's not a lot of subjectivity.
Mm.
You're nodding. Is that how you feel too?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I also remind myself all the time that, life is going to outlast me by a long shot. And so, what I do here really is just play. It's just an experiment. The whole thing is like, what am I going to make of, these however many years I have? Because life's going to go on, society's going to go on once I'm gone. I can't control, like, this is my belief, but I can't control a lot of the things that happen around me. But I can enjoy being surprised and being, you know, I have this saying, isn't that interesting, which is my way of dealing with things that I wouldn't have anticipated happening,
Yeah.
good or bad,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it just feels like we're not playing a finite game here. We're playing a game that's just, we're all playing the same game. It's this world happens around us. We react to things. We deal with things in our own ways, and hopefully we keep moving forward. But to me, it is, and this is what I love about the theme of what you want to talk about, is it's all play at the end of the
Hmm.
day.
Yeah. And I think this is a great place to jump into that. Because I'm very curious. So I've become obsessed with play, as you, Andrew, know, and as I think listeners are figuring out. Um, I especially how play comes into our adult lives, how it comes into what I think of as second acts, which is like anything from having a child, changing careers, relocating. Um, if there's playfulness in that, things go a lot better. I've been actually thinking, like, whoever you are, if you don't have play in your life, you're not really living. Um, and maybe that's a judgment that I can't make, but it's certainly how I feel, and how in the people around me, I see that, like, when it's a game, when it's more playful, oh wow, it changes everything, you know.
Mm.
Um, and like, you just when you were saying, I've learned to say, isn't that interesting, when something unanticipated happens. And I'm curious, you it looked you looked and sounded like someone who's learned that lesson, like, maybe that, not that it wasn't necessarily an easy lesson, but like, that isn't something you came into the world knowing.
No. um what direction to take this? Because I think play is an interesting word,
Mm,
it, and I think to suggest that if you don't have it, you're not truly living, I think would be to step back and say, well, what is it in the
mhm,
first place? And I heard somebody once play this sort of word game where he said, what's the opposite of winning and losing? Yeah. What's the opposite of winning and losing?
What's the opposite of winning and losing?
Yeah. And somebody said, not playing, like standing on the sideline. And I
Mm,
would argue that the answer is play. Because when I remember being born with was just a joy of playing, a joy of I lived by the lake, so I would go sailing. And it was, especially sailing where Mother Nature wins every time. There's no game to be won against Mother Nature.
yes, yes.
So all you can do is play with the elements, play with the waves, play with the wind,
Yeah,
try to get to your destination the fastest way you can, but she's going to determine the fastest route by
yeah,
what direction she decides to blow the wind from. So that was what I was born with, interestingly enough. And then I think what happens is you get this sense somehow from the messages around you that, well, no, you're not, you can't live your life that way. You have to try to control the outcome of the steps you're going to take. You should have a career plan or an education plan, and you should know what those steps are going to be.
yes.
And that definitely happened to me. And then, it went into my career where I tried to advance to the levels that, made me look like I was, higher caliber. And this
Mm,
was in sports coaching at the time. So it was always like pursuing the next job at a higher level. And then, higher into administration and moving up the ranks. And I had a family along the way there. And the further into that planned career I got, the more miserable and non-playful I was in all areas of my life.
mm,
And that it affected how I showed up, personally. It showed up in how I showed up for my kids. And so, I think that there's an arc when it comes to play but I wouldn't say it's just about, play as in throwing the ball around. It's a mindset towards how you live your life,
yes.
of how much control you feel you need to have to still move forward.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, play can be anything. Somebody's play, one person's play is going to be somebody else's like, oh God, no.
Right.
Um, and so what makes it up? And one of the quotes that I've got two quotes that I have lived one that I used to live my life by until a couple months ago, and one that I do now. And the first one is the opposite of play is not work, it's depression, which I understand was first stated by a guy named Brian Sutton Smith. And I have really, like, in building this show, in building my life, I mean, I've really thought about that because, like, if I am sitting in my chair and I've got 5% use of my hands, which means I can't knit, I can't cook, I can't hug somebody without pain, I can't, like, there's so much, right? That is depression. I mean, and for a long time it was until I learned that there were, like, until I branched out and tried to figure out ways and had people who believed in me and helped me. I mean, I'm thinking of my husband, who we just happened during that time to go to a party with friends, with my high school friends, like my dear friends. And he came home and he said, "You came alive while you were with them. Like,
Mm,
we need you to see your friends more."
mm,
Like, so that there are so many different kinds of play, but what are the elements? And then the one I live by now is Einstein's quote, "Play is the highest form of research."
mhm.
And so to really be investigating what makes up play, what are the factors that make up play, I think is really, really interesting. So Andrew, for you, what are the factors that make up play?
Yeah, I really think it goes back to this idea that it's about, waking up every day and looking forward to dealing with whatever comes my way,
Mm.
and feeling like joyful about that, not like I'm at the mercy of it, but that I'm looking forward to it. I heard somebody once say, the difference between a samurai warrior and like a professional athlete, is the warrior prepares for an unexpected outcome,
Hmm.
or a professional athlete basically prepares for a known set of circumstances. And, you know, the warrior mentality for me is about just not needing to know what the day is going to bring, whether it's a coaching conversation, whether it's going for a run, whether it's, you know, talking to my kids, and just enjoying the playfulness of creating whatever, you know, that experience is going to be. That to me is sort of that's the place I've gotten to through, you know, going through that period of being on the opposite side of that, and then having to find myself again and find that playful nature, and then come back to it. It was letting go of the control of what had to happen and how it had to happen,
Mm.
and just going out and living in a more playful and joyous way.
Wow. And you've told me before, there was a real catalyst for that
Mm.
change. Would you share about that with us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this was, I guess, about 20 years into my career. And I was visiting my parents, and an old high school friend had happened to be in town and reached out, and we got together, and, you know, we talked a little bit, and he said, you know, you're not how I remember you. And I thought, well, you know, that's not abnormal. 20 years, 25 years after high school, right? But he said, you've lost like that playful, like that joyous Andy that, you know, which was what my friends called me in school, was like that playful nature. Like, it's gone, it's not there. And he said, what's up with that? You know?
Mhm.
So it was said from a very caring place.
Yeah.
So we had a long chat about what was going on, and I was, you know, the way I was showing up was impacting my relationship and the family. It was impacting my career. And you know, he just said to me, you know, how do you want your kids to remember you?
Mhm.
And, you know, I thought about that question that night and for many days after. But I also thought about the fact that how interesting that somebody held on to the way they knew me for 25 years. He held on to that and cared enough to call me out on it.
Yeah. We talk a lot about serving, not pleasing, right? He
Yeah.
could have said, "Wow, this is a hard, I have a hard question, but I'm not going to ask it
Yeah.
because I want to, not make waves or everybody gets to live their life or whatever." But instead, he said that, and in such a way that you felt safe and held, and not like, "Hey, buddy,
Yeah. Yeah.
here's
There
what
was
you
no
should
judgment.
do."
No, there was no judgment at all to it. It was, yeah, I could tell it was coming from a really, you know, caring place. And, you know, he asked the right question because, you know, of course, what I would want for my girls was to live a happy, joyful life of their choice, not to feel, you know, controlled by the outside world or any system, you know, and to have that freedom to go and play in their own life. And I was not demonstrating that for them.
Mm.
So, yeah, it was a huge moment for me. And, you know, it led to a bunch of decisions around change. And, you know, the funny thing is, it really did bring me back to that same playful kid that used to go out the door and hop in a sailboat for hours on end. Because that's where I felt most alive, in that kind of
Mm.
space, you know, doing,
Yeah.
and that's in coaching. You know, I don't conform to what coaching schools or what programs or models you're supposed to follow. I just show up and do it in my own playful way.
Yeah.
And it feels right. Doesn't feel like there's no effort involved in it. And I don't feel I have to answer to anyone. You know, I have to answer to myself to be a good partner, and I have to be a good father. But what I figured out is I have to do that by showing up as me, not
Mm.
by trying to be something for someone else.
So play for you is a very deep part of you. If you're showing up as you and you're being playful, yes?
Absolutely. It's completely intertwined. And you said freedom, and I think that's the perfect word for what play is. It's freedom from the idea that you have to try to be something other than yourself.
Yeah. Wow. And if you show up truly as yourself, like it can, I think somebody might say, well, that's well and good for you, right? But to do it themselves, there's a real vulnerability to that, isn't there?
There is, but I think that when you show up, it's exhausting trying to pretend to be somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a choice,
Yeah.
that exhaustion shows up in a lot of different ways, right? It shows up in how you show up in relationships, in your health. Lots of different things are impacted by that. It's quite freeing to just wake up and go about your day without having to have that continual dialogue going on.
Yeah. And I actually think of vulnerability as I remember watching Brene Brown, maybe her first TED Talk, which is about vulnerability and shame and how they're two sides of the same coin.
Mm.
And the idea that, and if I think about it, sort of all my adult life, like it started with children. Kids open up to me. Kids tell me things. Kids somehow know that I'm a trustworthy person who's going to hold their heart in both of my hands, right? And it's gone not just children, but as I've gone through life, I've realized there's it's adults too. It's everyone. And I think watching that TED Talk really crystallized it for me that like what I do is I accept and embrace that vulnerability, and I don't make people feel ashamed, on any level. I was just talking to a client actually, and he was saying we were trying to figure out why the challenges that he has with his boss at work. And what it really came down to is my client, is he concentrates on connections. He really thinks hard about the people, and his boss doesn't. And so it'll show up in a way where like his boss will say something that makes my client feel like, oh, I'm wrong. I like he doesn't care about me, kind of a thing. And what we ended up deciding was we say those kinds of things sometimes too, because I feel like he and I are both what we call servant leaders. Like we're both the same kind of person. What we will do is we will go back and we will say, listen, that thing that I said, I'm so sorry that, like, can we talk about this a little bit more? Like we show up for people in a way that the boss didn't, basically. And I think that if you don't have that, then you cannot be playful. Like it's very difficult to sort of approach something in a way where this might not go right unless everyone has the sense that we're on an adventure. I mean, like I had that in my mind before, Andrew, because there's like the difference between not knowing what's going to come and not feeling like you need to control it. Like if I'm thinking on the good side of that, I think of it as an adventure instead of like as something to be afraid of or whatever. And it seems like that, like when you're talking about sailing, I think that's really when I thought of it before.
Yeah. It reminds me, I did a couple of years ago, I did like a 2-week hike. So it was like 450 miles, 15 days of 15 long days.
Wow.
And with another friend of mine. And he's very meticulous, details. Like he spent months and months planning our hike, every last detail. And I think I went shopping for my gear like 2 weeks before we were leaving and kind of deferred everything to him on the planning side. Now, as it turns out, the trip did not go at all according to plan. And so it was interesting that to see the sort of the two approaches, that what he needed for his confidence was to have as much detail, as much information, to feel he had, uncovered every possible thing. For me, it was actually to go into it with the mindset of, I'm assuming lots of things are going to happen that we can't plan for. And I'm going to actually enjoy that and enjoy adapting to whatever we have to deal with.
Yep.
And so, I don't know if it's a question of you can't have play with a certain kind of mindset and you can with another, but I do think that it's hard to have play when you feel you're constantly reacting to the outside world. But I think people can come from the place of empowerment and sort of self-determination. I think people can come from that place and look very different from one another.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
And I love that because you never know what someone who isn't you is going to create or come up with. And I just think that's amazing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So winding down, because we are a little bit over time. I wanted to share about something that just happened today, which was really fascinating. And of course, Andrew, after that, if you have something else that you would like to, if there's something that we haven't touched on that you really want to talk about, we can definitely bring that in. So you were saying before about not being able to let go of the idea that, like, maybe that's the wrong way to say it. You were saying before that, like, society, humans are going to outlive you, right? And even then I was thinking, just today I went on a walk with my son to this park near us, and one of the park rangers was there, and we got to talking, the three of us, because my son is really interested in anthropology and history and stuff like that. And she happens to be an anthropologist, and she shared with us that on this property, this park property, and she showed us where they were, and I can't wait to take my kid and go for a hike and see them. There are cairns, big stone, human-made piles of stone with quartzite rocks in the middle of them, or quartzite, crystals in the middle of them, that predate the indigenous peoples who live here. Like, even they don't have stories about why these rocks, cairns, why these walls are like that. And it just spurred this incredible conversation with my 17-year-old and I about what came before, and what are our, like, not just our responsibilities, but like what it's like to live in a world. I had thought I was going to have to go to Stonehenge or someplace to see and to experience something put in place by peoples from a very, very long time ago. And it turns out that not only can I go to this park, but I've been among these in a nearby place. I have a friend who lives, and on her property are these incredible cairns. And I remember being there a couple of years ago and being like, this place there's something really special about this place. I don't know what it is, but wow. And I love that. I mean, for me, that is like, there's just such a universe opening, playful sense to it all. And I just wanted to share that because I feel like there's a part, I don't really even know why, but intuition is high level pattern recognition, right? So I felt like I needed to share that in this conversation and see where it goes from here.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's interesting. I do a lot of work, as you know, with entrepreneurs and sort of social impact and that whole space. And, a lot of people that are trying to help with climate change and, a lot of social issues. And, I heard somebody say a couple of weeks ago that, humans are not going to destroy the planet. Humans are destroying each other. The planet's going to be just fine. Because you want to talk about infinite game, is the planet's going to win out end of the day.
Yeah.
So we're doing all of this stuff to each other that's shortening the potential lifespan of the human race on the planet, which is disturbing. But I also think that we are grossly, uneducated about, the people who've come before us and the things that they did, and the way that sort of the decisions we make now play out over time. And so what came up for me when you were telling that story was, it actually was going back to indigenous people. I've had the fortune of coaching some indigenous people in my coaching practice, and I learned so much from them about, the way they consider decisions now
Mm-hmm.
is like 7 generations into the future. That's
Mm.
their thought process, right? Is that far, what is the impact of what we're talking about now 7 generations from now?
Wow.
And I love the idea that there are things that we can go and actually touch and see and learn about that existed before even our indigenous people, were on the land. And I just think that it kind of, if we take that perspective and zoom far enough out, we can see we're going to have this tiny little blip of playtime on the planet in our lives. And all of the disturbance and all of the sort of noise we create in our minds and the anxiety that we carry, like, what's the point?
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, right? So play for me is actually about having the perspective to say that people been here a long time before us. There's going to be people long after we leave. The difference we make now, hopefully it's in the direction of making society and humanity live longer and prosper more. Anything else, it's kind of irrelevant in the grand scheme of
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
So I have no idea if that was the direction you were going with those stones, but what showed up for me is just, yeah, this planet's going to be around for a long time. Our piece is really short, and play brings out the best that we have to offer.
Yeah. I mean, I really genuinely didn't know where it was going to go. And that's one of my favorite things about conversations like this, because I don't have to be responsible for knowing. I can just contribute an idea and see where it goes. And what really, and I think maybe this is where we will wrap it up, is what's really in our control is like our next decision. Like, there's very little that we can control, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think there's this, I think it's the 7 habits of highly productive people or highly loved. There's some, I don't even remember the name of it, but in this book, they talk about 7 habits of highly something.
Effective people, I think.
Effective. There we go. Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm holding up my hands. There's a big sphere that is what our sphere of experience, maybe something like that. Like all of the things that we could know about. And our sphere of influence is a smaller sphere inside that. And the way that I've heard it said is that what we want to try and do is expand our sphere of influence. Well, yes, but not focus too much on the sphere of like what's going on outside of our sphere of influence, because that will paralyze us. We can end up really feeling anxious. And like, if we can only just see what is here now, wow, that's a special place.
It's the only place we really have. So if you're anywhere else, then you're actually, creating a make-believe reality, because, we have now, and as you said, I mean, our day is just a series of decisions, one after another. Now, what I like to help people do is have a sense of a general direction you would like those decisions to be going, and then let go of, trying to control how it all has to come to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And whether that general direction is based on your values, based on some goals, based on, a way of living that's important to you, that's all great. And it's good to have those sort of guideposts on the side to say, I know when I'm off that, and I know when I'm in that. But beyond that, there's way too many variables at play to think that you're going to control how it's going to come to be.
Yeah.
So go and play in that space. And to me, that's living.
Yeah. Yeah. It's where the fun is.
Where the fun is. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, Andrew Moss, I'm so grateful to you for being here with me today. I'm so grateful to know you. I mean, like what you put in the world is amazing, and I'm very glad to be a part of it.
Well, thanks, Kay. And likewise, and it's one of the benefits, if there are any, of this crazy COVID time is how many new people we've all been able to meet, because, you know, we have this technology to connect virtually, which obviously was around before, but wasn't a necessity for a lot of people.
Mm.
And, you know, it's another example of that playful nature, and the fact that I meet people every week, and you're one of them, who, you know, just change the way I see the world and change the things I think about, and how I see them. And that's playful to me, you
Yeah.
know, because
Yeah.
it's just proof that it's a journey for me, and it's a journey for all of us. And, you know, it's to go out there and to talk to lots of people and meet lots of people and be challenged in my thinking. Yeah, I mean, the last few years, it's been quite amazing to see how, you know, my path has changed, and to be able to connect with a lot of coaches and bring communities together. It's been a real blessing. So thanks for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Listeners, you can find, unless there's a better link, my thought was coachandrewmoss.com. Is that a
That
good
works
place?
just fine. Yeah,
Cool.
thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's such a pleasure to have you.
I appreciate it. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Me too. And I always try to wrap up, first of all, by saying thank you so much to you for listening, and for watching. If you happen to be watching on YouTube, it's great to have you here. This show has gone through some iterations in these last few months, and um, it's been very vulnerable. It's been a real, very playful journey for me. And if you're still here, or if you're new to the show, I'm really grateful to have you here. And finally, I always like to wrap up with a huge thank you to our producer, the man who is as playful as anyone I've met. He's very playful in so many ways, and it's so good to see him in that way. He is the 24-time winner of the Husband of the Year award. He's Benjamin Culp. And he's awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for listening and watching, and we will see you next time.